All right, it's interesting you bring up best practices because document I have put up in front of me are best practices for school resource officers. And it was created with the Wisconsin Department of Justice and the Wisconsin DPI. And I think that's an important collaboration and important to consider because it really, I think, really looks at the roles in educational facility, right? We're not just talking about policing out on the streets, but we're talking about police officers in our building. So I'm gonna get back to that because I want to talk about some of the things that I wrote down, but I think that this is an important place to start. And I think with the history of our district and the police department never having an MOU, I'm gonna suggest probably something unpopular, but I want to talk about some of the points just about the SRO program. So I think probably my number one concern and something we kind of touched on is criminalizing student behavior. And I think you gave actually good examples of how that happens. So let's say we did not have an SRO program in our school. And I was a high school educator last year, and I've seen students make not great choices, not great behaviors, including engaging in sexual conduct. When there are not SROs in the building, those behaviors don't get criminalized because there's not an obligation for the school to necessarily report those behaviors to the police department. But I think what you conveyed is that if there are police officers in the school, then you have an obligation to report that behavior through the criminal system, correct?
No, not necessarily. I got this one, Jim. Not necessarily. That's again, that officer discretion. And you're talking about the Josh Call document. It's 20 or 40 pages about best practices. DPI came through the Attorney General's office. Is that the one?
There's a brief one that's 4 pages. But
okay. I read one that was put out by Josh Call, the Attorney General, about best practices of SROs, giving all of us some guidance from a legal perspective. How do we figure out this relationship? I take the stance that we can't ignore the fact that a crime occurred, and nor would I encourage any school administrator or teacher to ignore it, but there are different ways of handling it. So as far as a blanket, it's criminalized. No, we're trying to reform behavior and not put people in the criminal justice. I said that so many times already tonight. I mean, I've taught juvenile justice before, criminology before, and dealing with young people is different than dealing with adults who engage in criminal behavior or do those kinds of things. Yeah, there's different ways of handling it. It's not a one size fits all.
But I think the discretion piece too, that as you talk about these officers rotating in and out of our schools, they're not going to all operate with the same discretion. I mean, they might view that as an instance that they should criminalize that behavior and send that kid through the criminal justice system. And that's where it just gives me, I guess, and the other, since you brought this up, I've heard stories that was brought to my attention by community members and staff about the incident with the young girl. And to me,
which incident is that?
The one that Chief McGillis talked about, where the 3 police officers had to take her in handcuffs down to the station.
Mm-hmm.
So to me as an educator, right, this is from my education lens, I see that as insubordinate behavior, but all of a sudden it became disorderly conduct. And I think that's that fine line that we talk about with education and police in our schools. And that's why I think this document really does a great job of kind of delineating some of those responsibilities. And I think we need to do a better job as a district, really defining what are those responsibilities. So when do we want the police to intervene? Because that's not clear to me. Like, I don't have clarity on, you talk about criminal behavior, and I think, all of us, I have 2 young kids in the district. We all think about safety, and I want my kids to be safe. I want every kid in the district to be safe, but that's not what we're talking about with some of these criminal behaviors that you've mentioned. Marijuana, for instance, as it's becoming legal around states around us, engaging in sexual activity. I'm not talking about those behaviors. I think you're talking about violent behaviors, and I think that's our call from our community, is to address those violent and safety concerns. But my concern is criminalizing behaviors that we typically see students engage in on a regular basis. And I say this as a parent of Black students because I do think that there are students of color, there are biases that play into that. I also have an aunt who was a law enforcement officer, so I understand the complexity of that relationship. But I'm also saying it from a lens of, I don't want any of our students to be criminalized for making bad choices. Right? Unfortunately, I don't know if that's happening, right? But I'm saying that it's not I don't think it's defined enough in our MOU for me to be comfortable to say that the SRO understands their role and responsibility to keep our schools safe, you know, to keep the violence out, to keep the guns out. But I also don't want them to have that free range to criminalize bad choices that students make.
So is sex in the stairwell a regular basis thing?
No, but I think it's a bad choice, and I don't think it's a behavior that needs to be
Okay.
criminalized. I think it needs to be dealt with.
So let me tell you
I
this.
think
So
it needs
there's
to be-
mandatory reporting, right? That's a sexual assault that has occurred.
Can I ask everyone in the gallery to, if you're going to want to have conversations amongst yourselves, to step out and do that, but in here, conversation needs to
A,
be up here.
a sexual assault has occurred, whether it's consensual or not. And by law, a sexual assault has occurred. The school then has a mandatory reporting. They must report those things. It's not like if the nasty police weren't here, they wouldn't have arrested them. The police are going to be notified, should be notified anyway, that there's mandatory reporting for the crime that's occurred. And this idea of criminalizing student behavior, you take sexting, for example, somebody who, one kid puts a picture of themselves nude, that's considered child pornography. It rises to the level of a felony. And they exchange it with so-and-so. And then so-and-so says, hey, look at this picture. And then they, share that with me. It gets all centered around. We have a major crime that's just occurred for kids acting like kids.
For making poor
decisions. So what we've tried to do is we're working with our city attorney and we've looked at ordinances and law across the country to try to decriminalize at least the first offense, because almost not every kid, but probably half the kids with cell phones now are doing inappropriate things with their phones. We don't want to make it a felony or crime and make them a sexual offender either. So we're trying to say, can we at least get an ordinance so we can write them a ticket and make this an ordinance violation? It's not a crime, doesn't rise to that level. So we're not out there trying to criminalize things, nor be in the schools to try to catch people and hope that we make an arrest and that kind of thing. There's a misconception, and I take a little bit of an exception with the bias. I hear about the bias all the time. Well, you must have a bias. You're a white cop. Clearly, you've got a bias against Black students. I do not. And I think the officers I work with do not. And people consistently tell us that, well, you're only doing this because they're Black. That is not the case. It is not. And I can tell you.
I don't think I was suggesting that.
Well, you said there's a bias.
There are biases that exist.
Of course there are. Do you have a preconceived bias against police officers? I'm not saying you do. I'm using it as an example.
No, wait, but I just want to acknowledge that there are biases that exist.
But that's not what's dictating the way we do our work.
Well, it's a complex issue because you have a law which should be colorblind, dealing with people from different demographics, different backgrounds, but they all want to be treated the same way when it comes to the distribution of the law, correct?
Sure, right.
So SROs are more trained, they're more adept, they're chosen for a reason. And I'm not, again, like Mr. Myers said, our patrol force also they're great problem solvers, but SROs take it to a higher level of, again, trying to figure out solutions in the best interest of the student, while also holding them accountable. But the accountability piece can be an administrative sanction, it can be parental sanctions. I remember being fearful of my parents more than I was anybody in law enforcement. And my dad was a police officer, so I was always afraid of the parental
Double whammy.
component of it. Yeah, it was a double whammy. But I also remember my SRO here in Wauwatosa, Officer Lofi, and I remember the conversations I had with that guy about, okay, if I ended up getting into trouble, that would be the guy I would go to. Hey, I messed up. Or, hey, can you help me out? I made a dumb decision, because like you, Dr. Jessup Anger, we all have a past, and it's part of growth and development.
And I appreciate that some students have that relationship with SROs, because I've seen it in my own family. Not all students do. And I think I want to recognize that.